It's my pleasure this morning to introduce Jim Keating, our first speaker. Jim was appointed to the position of Vice President of Nalcor Energy, Oil and Gas in 2009, where he is charged with continuing to access growth opportunities for Newfoundland Labrador Energy Corporation. Prior to assuming this role, Jim was Nalcor Energy's Vice President of Business Development. Before joining Nalcor Energy, Jim led the development of oil and gas projects in Canada for a major international oil and gas company, including joint venture investments, long-term growth, and sustaining initiatives, and government regulatory relations. His past experience also includes leadership roles in business development, negotiation, field development, project controls, and strategic planning. Jim holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's degree in business administration from Memorial University of Newfoundland. He is a registered member of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists, Newfoundland Labrador, and holds several board memberships, including the Board of Regents of Memorial University, Churchill Falls Labrador Corporation, Seaport, and the Janeway Children's Hospital Foundation. Please welcome Jim Keating.
Thank you very much, and good morning. And of course, I'm a proud parent of 3 girls who are beginning their summer holiday today, so I trust you've noticed the lack of traffic on the road this morning, albeit wet and woolly. So I'm going to start off with a bit of a safety moment. My safety moment today is to consider even the simple act of how we got here this morning. Think of every decision we take as a dilemma. With the dilemma, the goal is to do 2 things. First, of course, is to solve the dilemma, solve your problem. The second thing you need to do is think of, in how I solve the problem, I create culture. So we at Nalcor Energy have taken the better part of the last 6 or 7 years to intensely look at every facet of our safety culture. And as I'm going to show you right here now, here we are today in 2014, and as you can see, in about an 8-year span, we've driven, in this case, our all-injury frequency rate down to top quartile, or if not world-class levels, with simply that type of focus on solving problems and solving dilemmas by creating culture. In particular, if you're a leader, you go through that stop sign, that roll in that stop sign at the end of your workplace, and you just roll through it because you only did one of the 2. You looked kind of, as you drifted, and you said it's kind of safe, so I made a good decision. Maybe I've gone out to the traffic. You didn't complete it because you may have a bunch of eyes on you from the parking lot and from the windows above. Just saw the VP cruise roll through a stop sign. You failed the second. So what do you think is going to happen to your corporate safety culture? You always need to think of those 2 pieces in every decision we take. So we're quite proud of that. Our job is to do better, to go to zero, and to sustain. So I trust, and as I look around this room here now, I see lots of safety champions that all companies represented here are doing likewise. So let me jump right into it. I'm here to hopefully convey in the next 20 minutes a sense of what Nalcor Energy is doing in the oil and gas world specifically, and even with a tighter focus on exploration. And if I had to sum up Nalcor Energy's exploration strategy in one slide, in sort of an elevator speech, this would be it. It's to arrest our production declines through, of course, increasing exploration activity by reducing barriers, policy barriers as well as structural barriers, by gathering new high-quality geoscience data, and then to scientifically assess our resource potential, and then deliver it to the greatest number of capable companies now into the future. That's kind of what we do. We look at 2 facets. What's structurally not working for us for the last 30 years, because we've only had an average of 1 to 2 exploration wells a year here offshore Newfoundland, and try to diagnose why that is, and then in the diagnosis of that, try to reduce the barriers, and then, of course, provide more insight and give it to the broadest set of people in the industry. And so I'm going to give you an insight as to how that's going. So, put some context on it. What is Newfoundland Labrador's exploration challenge? Well, certainly not size or scale. It's certainly not anything to do with, you know, there's not enough of land, not enough of ocean space to attract new entrants. This is an inset in the North Sea inside Newfoundland Labrador's offshore jurisdiction, and you can almost see that we can fit 2 or 3 continental shelves of Norway and the UK in that picture. The UK, Norwegian, and the Newfoundland flags there, that's the total square kilometers of sedimentary basin that we've of course, mapped. So it's not for the lack of a sandbox that can hold oil and gas. So then, what could it be? Well, maybe it could be that we just have simply fewer wells. This slide shows 3 columns on the left side. 4,000 wells in the UK, almost 1,500 in Norway, and just over 200 for Newfoundland and Labrador. You can tell at a glance we are grossly underexplored, and it's no news to folks here who've been following our industry. Just to put it in perspective, the Hibernia field, that 1.5 billion barrel field, which is basically the lifeblood of the economy for the last decade and a half, it fits in a 150 square mile footprint. So how many Hibernias, then is the question, exist between those wells that we've drilled when we're at a density of 1 well for every 4,400 square kilometers? Keeping in mind, almost 85–90% of those wells were drilled in one basin within 150 square kilometers of some of our production facilities. Now, as I look to the next slide, we want to say, well, maybe with the wells we've drilled, we've just been disappointed. And companies kind of quickly turn attention elsewhere. Right here we see we favorably perform well here in that we have almost 20 million barrels per exploration and appraisal well discovered compared to UK, Norway. And if I line up another 10 countries, Newfoundland and Labrador would be right in the middle of the pack. Some are in the mid to high teens and some are in the low 20s. So we still we perform favorably well in that capacity, in particular in the light that most of those wells were drilled in the 70s and 80s. So there's got to be more to it. So the next slide will, I hope, start to shape up into giving some insight as to what our problem has been. So this is the Norwegian story. It's seismic and drilling on one sheet, on one slide, from the late 60s to present. And as you can see, there's a nice dotted line that shows the growth in 2D seismic, which is on the left-hand axis. And the solid line is represented by exploration wells, or in this case, wildcat wells, not wildcat and delineation, but just the wildcat wells. So, you know, there's a correlation there, strong correlation, 97–98%, and that's very typical of just about every other jurisdiction in the world that you can examine. Tight correlations, high 90s. The only difference is what the lag time is between data gathering and drilling, but there is a tight correlation there. Let's look at Newfoundland and Labrador's story. So as you can see, Newfoundland and Labrador had pretty similar growth in the 70s and early 80s as Norway in the two-dimensional seismic game. Little laggard in the well drilling. We did have the pip rents in the day and so on and so forth. And of course, they kind of disappeared in the early 80s. That's one of the reasons why we flatlined. But of course, other reasons why we flatlined as well, and that is, of course, Newfoundland and Labrador and Canada had to sort out their jurisdiction, and that takes time. And of course, once that was done, they had to make the rules, form the regulator, and so on through the Atlantic Accord in the mid to late 80s. And of course, the companies that were active at the time were focused on those 4 little yellow balls called Hibernia, Hebron, Terra Nova, and White Rose. They want to get these into development. So all I can say at this end is that there's many factors for why we're only getting anemic drilling. But the one thing you can do as an actor, in this case Nalcor is a state-owned company, Crown Corporation if you will, is be active in changing that picture. So as you can see, since 2010 there's a little sharp uptick. That sharp uptick is I call it the Nalcor effect. Working with our partners, TGS and PGS, who formed a joint venture for the purposes of a seismic program here offshore, Nalcor is in on that program for 20%, meaning we fund 20% of the survey. In return, we get 100% of the data. But of course, the beauty about that survey is that two-dimensional survey is a multi-client survey. So TGS and PGS, they license that data to the broadest set of clients, which are the E&P companies that they can. Nalcor's role, of course, is to help interpret, help to process the data, again, market, as we do, and I'll show you how we do that in a moment. And of course, bring value to that data and look through science as to what insights it creates. In that last 3 years, as much data was captured as been in the last 20. And I'll show you a little bit later on about what we're doing in 2014. So, what's the size of the prize? Most of our data, by the way, is focused in the slope and deep water areas. 75% of that area has never been imaged before by anyone, by any company. So indeed, it's exciting for everybody to look at data that no one has ever seen before. Why slope and deep water? Well, I hope this picture tells a story. This picture here shows that by the end of 2012, over $40 billion was spent globally in deep water exploration. That's 500 meters and deeper. If you think of our offshore, our shelf, where Hibernia and Hebron and Terra Nova and White Rose exist, that's about 100 meters of water, give or take. So we're looking at deep water, or even ultra deep, 3,000 meters of water with our survey. That's a lot of money, but we're only capturing 1% of that spend globally. Now, that doesn't sit right with us, because of course, look at all our real estate. You can count on one hand the offshore jurisdictions that have greater opportunity in terms of sedimentary basin. Western Australia, India, Indonesia, the Arctic, the Russian Arctic. I mean, you can literally count on one hand. In fact, our offshore equates to almost all the west of Africa. So it's a tremendous scale, and we're not simply catching enough exploration. That's something we've got to change, mostly because analysts predict in less than a decade that will triple to over $114 billion in this case. That's just exploration. Over $500 billion will be spent on development and production and exploration in that timeline. So our challenge here is even to hold on to the 1% market share, let alone try to grow it. And our thesis is that we can certainly grow it. If we grow it, if you look at the multiples, look at where the industry is trending, where the industry is heading, that should be good for Newfoundland and Labrador. By the way, who's doing that drilling? 30% of that investment is made by the top 8 super majors. 30%. That means 70% is undertaken by the mini majors or the big, large independents. There's 30 to 40 companies with the capability to explore and develop our offshore, and yet we only have a handful. So that's another focus area for Nalcor. So what is the strategy? Simply put, it's based on science and straightforward, and any 2x2 matrix, as you can attest, can sort out. That's the magic of 2x2 matrices. This slide simply says we look at every one of our basins. We have almost 3 dozen basins that we've identified both onshore and offshore in Newfoundland and Labrador's jurisdiction. And what we do is we look at the 5 key criteria for basin evaluation. Those criteria where explorers rank as a percentage, what the likelihood of occurrence is it gas charged, is it oil charged, is there a reservoir capable of storing oil, is it trapped in a structure, can it be defined, and is it sealed so it won't leak out if I apply pressure to it and try to extract it. These are the types of technical criteria that explorers look for, and when they rank basins. Of course, then there's the geopolitical and the fiscal and all those other considerations, but they're certainly secondary to an E&P company, because as you can see, they're doing a lot of investment in a lot of places where they're paying a lot of money in tax and royalty and undergoing some very tough geopolitical environments. So focus for those guys, focus for us is on the science part. So what we do is we look at each one of these basins, employ science, look at what data is available, assess it. And our goal is to move those little boxes, if you will, from left to right. Some will decline in prospectivity. That's how the chips fall. Some will increase, but they only move through data acquisition and processing interpretation, wide dispersion, collegial discussion, paper reporting, you name it. That's how these things move, and that's how companies assess, and that's what determines their investment horizon and their investment plans. And if I were to give a little bit more insight of those 30 basins that I referenced, some big, some small, we know a lot about very few. We know very little about many. So, I'm going to talk to some of the deep water ones now in a moment. So as I said, we've undertaken this program with TGS and PGS, some world leaders in seismic data capture. 2013, we ended a 3-year program where we captured over 47,000 line kilometers of data. As you can see in the Flemish Pass area, where the Beta Nord discovery was made last year by Statoil, we covered a grid size of 10 by 10 kilometers as opposed to the 60 by 60 or even 80 by 80 in the other areas. This survey, as it was planned and undertaken, was one of the largest 2D surveys underway at that time anywhere in the world. As you can see, it's an amazing scope. You can practically fit all our offshore projects within one of those squares. In fact, you can, in those 60 by 60, 80 by 80 squares. So we weren't looking for prospects to drill, although we found some. We were looking for basins. We were looking for what's our true extent. Because what you do over time is you map that out, and then you subdivide, especially areas of interest, where you do see some indicators, where you may have clipped an area of interest. Well, right now, our focus was on gathering data on that level of scale and do some regional survey. So this slide works well in Houston. Everyone is well familiar about how the Gulf of Mexico has shaped the United States' 30, 40 years of oil activity. There are companies and people that have only spent their careers in the Gulf of Mexico. So this is a vast playground. Only 4% of our offshore has been licensed. Yes, there's some turnover, but on average, no more than 4% has ever been licensed. We compare that to 50 to 70% in some of the more prolific and sustaining areas in terms of offshore basin. So this actually, to companies, when they see it, is good, because they want fairway, they want running room, they want a place that they can grow, provided they can understand what their potential is. So, what did that survey, just in 3 years, reveal? Well, this is our basin configuration as we had from the early 70s all the way to recent. And we used satellite slick monitoring, if you will, to highlight areas where we believed there were some seeps coming from the sea floor all the way to the ocean. Could be detected by satellite. They were processed by specialist service providers who would use methods to remove erroneous types of data. And what we did see is that there was a whole lot of seeps that were outside those basins. Those basins, as we know, in Newfoundland Labrador, they're gas prone. That's where we found over 5 TCF of gas. So what are oil seeps, or likely oil seeps, doing beyond that and out in deep water, when most convention would think that sedimentary packages that would be deposited out there over the hundreds of millions of years would be pretty thin and non-existent? Well, you know, with the beauty of a couple $1 million and the interest of folks that were exploring in Greenland, who were talking about analogs to Labrador, there was enough industry interest from both survey companies and oil companies that they said, let's find out. So Nalcor worked with PGS and TGS, lined up some survey lines on those oil seeps. And here's what we found. The largest basins that we've ever had and didn't know. So here we are, 3 new basins and the delineation of a 4th. The best thing about this is we believe that they're oil prone simply because the deposition was in a marine environment, likely, versus a terrestrial one, which generally speaking in geologic terms means it might be prone to oil. As we look at the mapping from well logs on the shelf and take them all the way out the seismic line. So that's good news, and plus, we have oil seeps. So we have some plans to further kind of get under the hood and figure out what's going on there. How's the plumbing work? So this is just actually a high-level list of the things that Nalcor is doing on the oil and gas front this year. So with 2D seismic, we're partnering with, again, TGS and PGS. We're renewing that partnership because it was so successful. They see it from their shareholders. They were encouraged by the licenses that they were selling and the interest from the industry as a whole to move that along. So we're doing 31,000 kilometers this year in our offshore, coupled with the 47. That's a big deal because we're now using 2 vessels. 3D electromag, we're going to actually use proof of concept down in the Flemish area. Again, all this data is going to be available to companies before the 2015 land sale. We're going to continue with satellite slicks. We're going to do seabed coring where we see those slicks, so we can look and see if there's any microscopic determining factors of whether there was actually in situ or let's say, geologically created oil versus man-made in that area. Biostratigraphic analysis, meta-ocean, and some regional rock property studies are all things that we are going to perform this year. And you see some of our partners listed in their logos there. All that information is going to be on the website. It's going to be accessible through the Nalcor portal. Folks can get their hands on it. Some of it, because it's working with private sector companies, they have licensing arrangements, so you have to pay a fee. Some of it, because it's basically safety related, like a geocore pressure study, we're going to make that available for free for anyone to look at it, because I think it's important for anyone to understand what pressures you're drilling into. There's just this little list of things we're doing. So I want to give you now, before I just close, with a couple of interesting slides of Nalcor's investments and how they're paying off. I just want to give you a sense of how this works together. On this side, we see a satellite image on sort of that tilted little square there, and that black streak. That's an actual satellite slick identified straight over what we believe to be an interesting prospect, outlined in yellow and blue. And that red circle is where we're going to gather some cores. So now we're integrating 4 types of data. Satellite data, with seabed core data, with seismic data. And then finally, if we're lucky enough that seep is actually in progress, as our ships are in the area, we'll skim the surface and do bioassay on the oil, hopefully, that we've seen. So those are 4 types. The 5th, of course, is to drill a well. This is why this next slide is important. This is a discovery well from an analog prospect offshore Ghana that holds about 1.5 billion barrels. One of the things Nalcor does, by the way, when we go around talking to those 30, 40 companies, is we look at our immense data set, look at prospects like this, and this one is one of these stratigraphic fans. It's never been tested in Newfoundland Labrador offshore before. We've done rollover anticlines, tilted fault blocks. That's where most of our oil comes from, in those kind of structures. But we see those too in the deep water. But deep water affords you even more play types than you tend to see on the shelf. This is a particularly interesting one. So we go through high grade and look at the prospects that we have, find analogs to, say, some of the biggest discoveries in the last 5 or 6 years, find the companies that made the discovery. We go to them, sit down for 3-4 hours, make presentations, lots of nerdy detail and seismic stuff, and all we do is sit back and they look at the data, they walk up to the screen, they look at this, they look at each other, things get really quiet then, because they're getting serious. Then usually the question is, have you shown this to anyone else? So we like that, and that's what we've been doing, and that's kind of the value we get from data and interpreting the data and actually giving life to real marketing of our offshore. So we're everywhere. We present. We're over a dozen papers presented all over the world, and we continue to do so. We're known. And now, all that work, by the way, in 2014 costs us about $11.5 million. Not a bad investment. The provincial government is contributing $500 million to that. So where are we getting the other, say, $11 million? Well, it's coming from our oil investments. So we are reinvesting the production that we're currently getting from our offshore fields into this. Basically, it's front-end loading the pipeline, if you will, of companies and ideas, prospects, wells, and future projects. Here's what it looks like. This is our capital. This is what everyone wants to talk about. How much are you spending on the projects? Well, here it is. And I truncated it to 2024 simply because it goes on to 2050, right, with the projects that we're in. It's great. It's great cash flow. But this is our cash. Our biggest cash out the door in terms of capital requirements is next year about $250 million. Time now is that dotted line 2014. But let me now add the revenue. First oil was back just in 2010. It's been modest ever since. We're really relying on just 2 projects with a handful of wellheads to get that. But we do see a jump in 2015, mostly through Hibernia South, and of course further expansion to the White Rose field. And then we pick up again in 2017, 2018, the first oil in Hebron. So now let's just add a little bit more reality to this cash flow. We have operating costs, we have royalty, and yes, we actually pay royalty. Nalcor doesn't keep it, goes to the provincial government, and that's in yellow. And we pay net profits, interest, and of course, then I took exactly what the accountant gave me, and there's cash adjustments year over year that we've put in there. So that's our total cash flow. Then add, subtract, and add those 2 bars, looks like this. So what I want to leave you with is this thought. We will be investment self-sufficient by 2016, latest 2017. That production profile, by the way, was governed on oil prices of about $95 a barrel. Now, Iraq and other things have created $112, $13, $14 recently. That's not probably going to last. We all know the oil price changes, but we believe it's somewhat of a conservative profile. But the real important point here is that we're going to have government payback somewhere late 2019. What that means is the sum of the red bars, which is basically government's equity investments from taxpayers, from you, our shareholders, we will have earned all that money back, plus royalty, by 2019. If I added the royalty that we'd pay, I can accelerate that by about a year or so. So that's a 20% rate of return. There's not many investments that you're going to take in a public presence to make that rate of return. By the way, that rate of return compares to the top 8 super majors' portfolio rates of returns, actually favorably, because it's less than 20%. So it's not a bad rate of return, not a bad industry. So, last slide is, here's how it breaks down. So just think of every barrel that we produce. This is our 2013 actual result. $111 a barrel was our average experience. We add $3.80 of exchange. We take away about $5 in royalty. We take away just over $9 in operating cost. Take away almost $5 in transportation and marketing. And take away almost $12 in internal costs. And of course, there's exploration investment and other administrative costs. Our net back is about $84 a barrel. And we see that be holding firm for a little while longer with some puts and takes. Thank you very much.
That's awesome.